I'm gonna start doing Patreon requested videos again, starting with this particular video, which had the loveliest of vague requests. The request was just Junji Ito, and I love those requests because it's a request in which I get to do whatever kind of video I want, which kind of seems like the opposite of like a request, but whatever. Hey there, creepy peeps. My name is Nightmare Maven. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're gonna be talking about Junji Ito. I would frame this in like, not quite a ranking, but more like if you were looking to get into Junji Ito's stuff, this is like the recommended like order I would read things in. This is what I would recommend to you, to read these in this order. Yes. But in case anyone isn't familiar with the name, Junji Ito is a Japanese horror mangaka or writer slash illustrator of manga. He started writing when he was 4 and continued as a hobby until he became, of all things, a dental technician. But in 1987, he submitted a story to a Japanese manga magazine called Monthly Halloween. His story won an honorable mention and ended up running for 13 years until it was serialized, and that series was Tomie. And thus, a horror icon was born. Junji Ito is a notable name in the horror genre now, thanks to his horrific stories and possibly even more so his illustrations, which are so singular. Like, there's no way you could mistake them for anybody else's work. They're perfect examples of like the intersection of cosmic and body horror. And his stories just have a way of getting under your skin. And there's a quote that Ito has said about his work that I really like. It was in an interview with Netflix. I'm not gonna show the clip because Netflix will smack you down so hard with the copyright. But Junji Ito explains that he wasn't particularly aiming to make body horror manga, but he says, quote, "I believe the human mind is the scariest part of oneself. When the body manifests those fears, the body becomes the scariest part." And I think that quote simply and concisely explains why his work is so iconic. So I'm gonna present some of the books that I have read so far by Junji Ito in a kind of order that I would recommend if you're just getting into horror manga. I am by no means an expert. I have not read every single one of his books yet. I plan to, but I'm not there yet. But so this, let's just consider this like part 1. So I would recommend that anybody start with Deserter. This is a short story collection of some of Junji Ito's earliest works when he was just coming onto the scene as a horror manga creator. I think the anthology setup is a great way to get into his storytelling style without like overwhelming yourself with a super duper long story. And it will give you a very like basic intro into a lot of the themes you'll find in his work, like obsession, the relationship between predator and prey, and the loss of humanity. You can also see the progression of his art style in this particular book, which I think is a really fun thing to see, and it makes us kind of like a natural introduction, I guess, to his work, even though it's not the very first big manga story he created, which was Tomie, like I mentioned earlier. But it's also not as intimidating as picking up something like Uzumaki right out the gate. Next, I would recommend Gyo. I will say, based on the few books that I've read so far, it is hard to kind of pick a second book to get into after Deserter that doesn't just kind of like immediately throw you into the deep end a little bit. The story is a little bit crazy, so it'll kind of get you used to that. Because that's something you need to be ready for. So the story follows a couple trying to survive as hordes of dead sea life take over dry land with the use of mechanical legs powered by what is called the death stench. I know. It sounds bizarre, but it's low-key kind of funny. I feel like Junji Ito was really sitting there like, sharks are pretty scary, but I feel like you wouldn't really be scared of them unless you're in the ocean. So what if I gave them legs? And that's like the premise for the story. It's like the perfect combination of absurd and nauseating. And as I found out reading this, I kind of dig that. Next, I would recommend Tomie. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, this was Junji Ito's like first like published serialized manga this is it. This would, you would think, kind of be the natural beginning, but it's so big, I feel like it's kind of intimidating. The story follows the titular character, Tomie, who is a beautiful young girl that becomes a sort of succubus type creature. Her beauty drives people to madness to the point that sometimes they kill her because they love her so much, or she's so beautiful, and so that nobody else can have her. So it's really dark, just that forewarning. The story is, again, kind of bizarre. Tomie has these regenerative powers. She has the ability to copy herself, like make copies of herself. So throughout this series, you're following Tomie, but it's not the same Tomie through the entire book. You're following different ones. So that's where it gets a little bit weird. So the story gets pretty wild, and that's why I would recommend it as maybe like a third or fourth read at least. I feel like sometimes it was a little hard to follow in that sense, where I had to go back and kind of reorient myself to see where we were. It's one of Junji Ito's most iconic works, and it's a staple if you're reading his work. And finally, if you get through those 3 books, I feel like you're probably ready to tackle Uzumaki, which is not his first work, but probably his most notable. This is my favorite Junji Ito book that I've read so far. It takes place in a small town that is haunted and eventually possessed by spirals. Yes, you heard that right. Spirals. Apparently, Junji Ito got the inspiration for this from other Japanese animation, where spirals on the cheeks of characters are used to represent like warmth and just good feelings. And he said, yeah, I'm gonna ruin that and make that terrifying. And honestly, I love him for it. There are a few things that are more like unsettling and upsetting than when somebody takes a concept, a thing, whatever it is, that is normally is almost completely largely associated with good feelings and makes it terrifying. It's kind of hard to explain though, like what it looks like when a whole town is possessed by a spiral. You really just have to read it to see, and I'm not just saying that, like genuinely it's hard to describe. Not hard to follow, surprisingly, when you're reading it. It's such a wild story, and reading it is almost like being in like a giant spiral yourself. Like you just keep running around and around and eventually thinking you're gonna find the center, and you, like it just keeps going and going and you just keep running. Spirals also have a sort of hypnotic effect, and the drawings in this book are also so hypnotic. Like you can't look away. There were a few pages, like the illustrations, like I just sat and looked at them for like 10-15 minutes. They're truly disturbing, but you can't look away. I don't know, I didn't find any interviews where that was an intention, like maybe like a dual purpose for using a spiral of all things, but it works very well. So hopefully that was something either helpful or inspiring, maybe, to if you were thinking about trying to read some horror manga. I would definitely check out Junji Ito. So if you have some favorites that I didn't mention in this video, please let me know in the comments so I can figure out what I want to read next from him. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here. Become a creepy peep today. I post 2 videos every week on Mondays and Fridays. I do live streams, collabs, all that fun stuff. So I'll see you very soon with something. Until then, stay strange. Bye.